wuwa 3.0's first half is looking stacked, so today I aim to help you decide who to spend your precious astrites on. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. We're kicking things off with Lynae. This character is extremely good for basically any Wuthering Waves account. I would say basically the only situation in which you wouldn't really want to pull for this character is if you're a Cartethyia or Zoni main. In basically any other situation, you're going to be able to make some use of this character. She is extremely strong looking, and she appears as if she's going to end up being very versatile. Genuinely, this is one of the most flexible second slot teammates that Wuthering Waves has released in a long time. I would really encourage that basically any type of player pulls for her. Whether you're a new or old player, this character is going to be a good investment. And it makes sense. She is the big Premier 3.0 release after all, so I was expecting this character to be really good. A cut above the rest, so to speak. That doesn't surprise me. And it appears that that has definitely been delivered on, so I would 100% recommend this character to basically any type of player that isn't a negative status main. And even then, Wuthering Waves is a game where you ideally want at least 4 well-built teams, so you are still going to have a place to put this character, even if you're a negative status main. To put it into perspective better, this character essentially eliminates the need to get a more specific second slot teammate for a specific given DPS team. For example, let's say that you don't want to pull Juja for your Carlotta. Well, you don't have to anymore. You can just use Lynae instead. Or, let's say that you don't want to pull Choyuan for your Galbrena. Well, then you can just use Lynae. Or let's say you don't want to pull Ciaccona for your DPS Yuno. Well, then you're going to easily be able to get away with just using Lynae, and in fact, I expect this to be pretty good. You get the idea. She is hyper versatile. It's essentially like a 5-star Sonhua. I never thought we would see the day, but no, here we are. We live in a world where we are quite literally getting the equivalent to a 5-star Sonhua, because back in the day, that lady was really good at slotting into basically any team as a really nice versatile option. And now, ironically, the student of Star Torch Academy is taking up this torch and passing it along. So, I would say that literally no matter who you main, you're going to be able to utilize this character at the very least, because she is going to be extremely busted on release and remain busted in the future. Because here's the thing, we haven't even seen the full extent of her potential yet. She's going to be amazing for all of these characters on launch and essentially eliminate the need for you to go out and get really specific teammates for certain characters, but she is also likely going to be good for Toon Break characters in the future for whenever we inevitably get a DPS that's mostly centered around Toon Break. So not only is she going to have insane value on launch, but she's going to have amazing value in the future, most likely. And I don't really like placing my bets on quote-unquote future value because it's a bit silly to evaluate characters based on value that they don't already have, but I would say that in this particular case, I can make an exception because she is already such an amazing pull for any account, basically, and she's also got the proposition of being even better in the future. And if I'm wrong, it's not really an issue because she's already such a fantastic pull anyway, so you basically win no matter what the situation ends up being. But to focus more on why she's good already, even if you do have these more specific teammates for your characters, it's likely that Lynae might end up being straight up better than some of them, especially whenever we eventually get Mornier, because I believe that potentially Mornier could end up being a Lynae upscale if they're paired in the same team considering Toon Break mechanics, but we're gonna have to wait and see in that regard. But even just Lynae on her own is very likely to become best in slot for numerous characters. She just looks like she's really strong, she seems really versatile, and I cannot recommend her enough. No matter what type of player you are, this is going to be a very useful pull for you. I myself am looking forward to getting this character. She is going to offer a buff to quite a lot of teams. She's going into SS tier for the value rankings of this half. Dude, she is amazing, and I could not recommend this character enough. Absolutely busted unit, and I really could not sell her enough. Seriously, don't underestimate her. Then we move on to our lovely bard Ciaccona. So she's a pretty good character, but only if you're interested in investing into aero teams. I would say that if you're a really big Cartethyia fan, well then she is essentially a must pull. You need her for Cartethyia. This can be circumvented by playing Air Rover and Chisa, however it is just so much better to have a Ciaccona by Cartethyia's side. So I'm just gonna say this, if you're a really big Cartethyia fan, then yes, you want to pull for Ciaccona, there is basically no debate. She is the erosion negative status applicator, and she is a huge upgrade over basically any other team comp that you can think of for Cartethyia that doesn't use Ciaccona. Nothing comes close. and she ends up being one of the strongest TOA options available if you do have Ciaccona. So yes, get Ciaccona for Cartethyia. There is a reason why they are pairing their reruns together. However, I will say that the nice thing about this lass is that she does still have some value even if you take Cartethyia out of the equation. One of those being DPS Phoebe. This lets Phoebe be used in Whimpering Wastes because she's able to apply Spectral Frazzle and Multi-Wave, and that's something that Phoebe really needs in order to have comfortable multi-wave. Now, I should add that this is mostly just for Whimpering Wastes, because if you're playing Phoebe in TOA, she does have stronger teams these days, such as using Furlova as a second slot teammate. So all around, it's not going to give you access to the strongest Phoebe team, but it's going to give you access to the most comfortable DPS Phoebe team. And I will say, Absolution Phoebe and wuwa isn't exactly the strongest thing ever, but if you're a big Phoebe fan and you really want to play her there, then Ciaccona essentially gives Phoebe access to every endgame mode in Wuthering Waves. So I would say if you really care about the Acolyte, then that adds a lot of value to Ciaccona. Do note that in such a situation, Static Mist's buff will actually be nice for Phoebe. It doesn't really do anything for Cartethyia, who's an HP scaler, but for Absolution Phoebe it's quite nice. And to add more to her value as an Aero character, she's really nice for Gion Hyper, because you can play Gion, Yuno, and then of course Ciaccona, and she's also able to be quite nice for DPS Yuno herself. Now I will say that Lynae, and perhaps Mornier, as I do expect Ciaccona to soon be kicked out of Yuno's best in slot DPSing teams, as I personally expect Lynae Mornier to be the new best in slot for her. However, she is still a very viable option here, and it's a nice way to play DPS Yuno. I will say that if you have to choose between her and Lynae, just get Lynae instead. However, if you have multiple Aero characters on your account, you have a Cartethyia, and you just feel like Ciaccona will be a more valuable pull for you, then that is a completely valid choice to make. All around, she is a good investment, but I would say that these days, now that we have Lynae coming out, I wouldn't really pull her anymore unless you're going for Cartethyia. Because in DPS Yuno situations, you would rather just use Lynae. And I would say that if you're a big Gion Hyper fan, then Ciaccona is also worth your time. She is still a good Aero investment, and she is still a good Phoebe investment, but TOA Phoebe has stronger teams now, and I would say that if you're after DPS Yuno, there is very soon to be a better team. And I would say that even without Mornier, Lynae is still very much going to be the better pull over Ciaccona. So I'm going to put Ciaccona into A tier for the value rankings of this patch. Not a bad character at all, she still has her value, but I would say that going into the future, she's not going to be as valuable as she once was. Then for Cartethyia. Okay, so for quite a while, this has been one of the strongest TOA DPSs in the game. She is really good. However, I don't think she is worth investing into at this point. Now, I would like to emphasize, Cartethyia is not bad. This is just advice that I am going to give about Zani and Cartethyia from here on out. I personally wouldn't invest into negative status DPSs outside of their release window unless you really, really like them. I don't think it's worth it. You need to get their applicator, and then you need to get the DPS themselves. Cartethyia and Ciaccona are running next to each other. If you already have one, that's great, but if you need to get both of them, getting Cartethyia herself is just not going to be good. Now, if you have Chisa, it will be playable, but if you don't, it just isn't going to be very good at all. And all around, I just cannot really recommend Cartethyia anymore. It's a big investment commitment to make for a DPS that is likely soon going to be outclassed, and if not outclassed, we're gonna get a lot of other characters on our level. In fact, we already kind of have. Galbrina is a very strong TOA DPS. Augusta is a very good DPS in general. For a while, she hasn't really sat alone at the top of the DPSing spectrum, and I do expect that gap to close even further as time goes on. In fact, Furlova is the current best DPS in the game right now. So if you're a big Cartethyia fan, I'm gonna say this. She is good. She's not a bad character, and she is indeed very cool, so I can understand wanting her. But to say that she's worth investing into at this point, I honestly don't think so. If you want a cheaper Aero DPS, unironically just pull for Yuno instead and get Lynae this upcoming patch. I think that would be a much better investment for your account, and you get two far more flexible characters. Negative status characters are just really expensive to invest into, and they just rarely ever end up being worth your time. You also usually need the signature weapons, and it's very hard to avoid that. Now, yes, that is the case for a lot of Wuthering Waves DPSs, but with Zani and Cartethyia in particular, it's very bad. Especially for Cartethyia, because she's an HP scaler, and we don't really have any other good 5-star HP scaling swords. In fact, I am pretty sure her signature weapon is the only HP scaling 5-star sword that we have. The value proposition here is just so bad that unless you have the Astrites to burn and you already have a Ciaccona, then fine, she's not a horrible pull, but to be honest at this point, unless you already have things set up for her, I just wouldn't pull for Cartethyia. She's not bad, and I don't necessarily think she's going to suddenly become worse in 2 seconds. But that's not really my point here. My point here is more so that negative status teams require a lot of commitment, and I just think that that's not really worth your time at this point. Now go for her if you love Cartethyia and you really want her, but otherwise, just avoid her. It should be noted that I make the value rankings in relation to the other characters within the patch. I am putting her into B tier for the value rankings of this patch. I am not calling Cartethyia B tier, I am just saying her value level is, especially without a Ciaccona. She is just so outclassed in value when we have a decent support and an absolutely broken SS tier support within the same patch. This is a pretty stacked patch, and I am pretty excited about Wuthering Waves 3.0. All around, I think that Lynae is an absolutely broken character, and nobody really compares to her value. The two arrow characters are definitely good, but I would say they are products of their time, and slowly but surely, they're going to phase out of the meta. I would argue that Cartethyia is slowly already phasing out of the meta, simply because her pull proposition is just so bad. But I would argue that's more so just a design flaw with negative status characters. Ciaccona is not necessarily a bad pull these days, I just don't really think that she's as good as she used to be. But all around, a decent enough batch of banners with one very good support. Hopefully this video was able to tell you who'd get you the best bang for your astrites in wuwa version 3.0's first half. This has been Juice, signing out, and the answer is Lynae. I'm just gonna be honest, the answer is Lynae.